Glad you dropped by. We're going to do a Q&A today. There's been some questions that keep accumulating, so I felt like it's time to stop down and take some time. This is definitely going to be a longer video today, but to go through some of the questions that you have. And it's such a privilege to be here. I don't have letters behind my name, but I do have in the trench experience of growing up in a very toxic family system and have experienced the full effects um, in that household growing up and in my adulthood. And I've been moved to share them, which is why I created this channel to provide hopefully inspiration for your own transformation and help to walk through some of the difficulties that arise having grown up in a toxic system or being in one now, because oftentimes we find ourselves in adulthood in very toxic systems and may have a sense that we are in it, but don't know what to do about it. So today I thought I'd take some of the questions that have been coming in. And the first one is, will I ever really make a difference within my toxic family system? I feel like every time I address an issue, it's either ignored or the behavior changes for a bit and then shifts back. So, can we ever really create change in our toxic family system? And I can only share my experience in answering that question. So I had an inkling that there was something really awry in my family system growing up, but I wasn't sure. I thought maybe other people experienced similar stuff. And it was in adulthood that I finally realized, yeah, I grew up in a really dysfunctional household, and I had to clean up the remnants of growing up in that household. And for me, when I left my family of origin, I left when I was 17. It was the morning after I graduated from high school, and I didn't go back often. I went back when I was in college and the first couple of years that I was working professionally on a fairly regular basis, a couple times a year. But oftentimes I'd come away from those visits depressed, sometimes even suicidal. And this was before I was in my own recovery to understand why. So once I got clean and sober and started working on my own issues of my childhood and upbringing and how they were replicating themselves in my own life, in my own scenario, I had to take some pretty stringent steps. I didn't visit very often. I didn't go back and engage often with my family, but we're also a family that we don't call very often. We don't connect very often, or we didn't back then. And everybody was pretty much, fending for themselves. But I had to draw some serious boundaries, specifically with my mom. My mom was the one that I experienced the most flagrant abuse. I mean, it was the most overt. My dad's was a little more hidden. It was a little more covert, although he had that sting, that sarcasm that only an active alcoholic can sort of present. He seemed the hero, and my mother seemed the monster. And it was only years later when I could really get a distance and get some perspective that I saw her history and how her own abuse was playing out in the abuse that she was perpetrating. But back to this question about, can we really make change? Well, what made change for me within my own family system was for me to take some time on my own, get perspective, and go deep, do the inner work, And believe me, I did not want to go back and take a look inside of that household system. I wanted to just gloss over it and move on, but ultimately that's what I needed to do. So I did have a separation, a period of, I think it was almost 3 years when I totally separated from my mom. I didn't engage, I didn't pick up the phone, and I needed to do that to develop a sense of boundaries, to develop a sense of my own being, and that it was okay to separate, that yes was a complete sentence and no was a complete sentence. And once I started to really gain a clearer sense of self, um, I could go back in small bits and engage with my family. But believe me, the toxicity would remain, and it was in my body at a cellular level. Some of it still is, and this is after decades of work. So I have to be really cautious and take care of myself. But what's happened, what's transpired is I've gained a lot of compassion for my family members, my ancestry, where they came from, the abuse that they were carrying. And that's given me the space to really have a container and of love. And for some of us, we never get there. It's understandable, but I did a lot of work and I was able and am able to now engage. My mom is not with us on this plane anymore, but we still communicate very clearly. And it's what I was doing when she was here. For a period of time, we lived on the same coast, the East Coast. And then after about 13 years out of the home, I moved to LA, to the West Coast, and communicated telepathically with my mother and didn't understand that I was doing that. Didn't understand that I was doing that until she transitioned to the other side. But I'm glad that I had the tools that I had once I had my own son. There was a lot more to connect with her on, but I still had to be very careful. She wanted to be taken care of. She wanted to be waited on hand and foot. And I did do that as a child. And I did wait on her at different periods in my adulthood. But then I could clearly draw the line and say, this isn't okay with me. That doesn't feel good. And I'm not going to step into this. And she would respect my boundary. Um, she really did. And I give her a lot of credit. She had a lot of love in her heart. The issue was that she could flip in the other direction so quickly. It was more prevalent, I think, as a child growing up than it was as an adult. But I was always at the ready and a little uneasy around her. So the change really came when I was grounded within myself, when I had tools to take care of myself, when I actually gave myself credit um, for being a human being with value, with worth, with a beginning, a middle, an end. And that took some time, quite honestly, and it developed in stages. And I've been able to really dissect my level of comfort and my needs, and that it's okay to say no, thank you. It's okay to stay in a hotel rather than to stay in family homes. It's okay to take care of myself. There's a family gathering coming up soon, and I've opted out, and the guilt came up. It definitely came up, but I know I'm feeling very vulnerable right now. And it's understandable. A lot of us are. There's a lot of interesting energies coming up. There's a lot coming up for us to review in toxic systems, both globally and within our families. And I knew it wasn't a time to engage with my family this summer. It's not a time for me to travel. I need the time to ground in myself and take care of myself with love. And this is the most loving thing that I can do rather than go back and be on edge and take care of others and be drained myself. So I've had to say no to a family trip. And yeah, I do feel guilty. My father's, not a young chicken anymore. And I'm not sure how much we'll see each other on this plane, but I've had to put myself first. And that takes courage and it takes support. And you learn it's okay to say no, thank you. So change really can occur. And as a result of my putting this out, other changes have happened in the family. And we have a lot of respect for each other as a family unit now. I'd say even more than when we were growing up, when it was so competitive, when it was dog eat dog. So I think when we all get together, yeah, it's pretty soon after we all get together, we all fall back into those roles we used to play. But at least I'm more cognitive of it. I'm aware of it, and it doesn't pull me down into the state where I'm suicidal or I act out or there's not a lot of drama that happens from my end anyway. And so change has really occurred in my family, and it's a result of me going in and doing the work that I need to do. It is not going to come from the outside. It is not going to come from getting an apology. It is not going to come from getting acknowledged from the perpetrator. It's not. It's not going to happen. And once I really surrendered to that, that's when things really started to shift long term within my own family dynamic. So I hope that answers that question. I hope it's been helpful to you. And it's a process. And like I always say, we're in it together. And it's not all doom and gloom. Absolutely not. There's such beauty in this process. And I really want to encourage you. So we've got a lot of questions. I think I better keep it moving. Um, Describe how family addictions transfer to your own adulthood and how you may have dealt with them. Great question. So, one of the things I feel I'm here is to help us clear our toxic ancestry. And in my ancestry, there's a lot of addiction, there's a lot of alcoholism, um, there's a lot of mental illness. Yeah, a lot. And so I feel like one of my things was to address it. So I saw my father drinking. He was inebriated more often than not. I didn't even know what it was like to have a sober father figure. And I didn't really know as an adult until until I was deep into an adulthood when people were intoxicated and when they weren't. So that was an interesting thing to understand. But my own addictions started to flag very early. I mean, I was 6 years old and I had Oreos coming out my nose from eating so many, trying to find a soothing, and I was replicating my mother's behavior. She would eat out of the grocery bags as we were coming out of the store. Her central nervous system was on such overdrive and she was desperate for self-soothing. And my father soothed through alcohol, but he also had an addiction with food and was an exercise bulimic. He would exercise after he had binged on food. And I replicated both of those pieces. I drank alcoholically and I ate alcoholically, like from a very young age to stuff my feelings. I was trying to avoid feeling and getting out of the terror and the agony of being a self and trying to find some kind of comfort and soothing and some kind of recognition that I was a human being alive within this toxic and chaotic system. So I think I was in my early 20s when I knew something was wrong. My father used to take the whiskey bottle out at 7:30 a.m. and go glug, glug, glug. And there I was at work in the office. There used to be wine in the refrigerator. My boss was out. I took the wine jug out and glug, 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 drinking out of the wine jug because I needed to garner the courage to ask for a raise. My esteem was so low. And it wasn't that I drank every day, but when I drank, I tend to black out. I remember going to a bar to have a shot of whiskey because my then boyfriend was coming back from Europe and I was nervous about facing him. And the bartender yelled out, "Does your dad know what you're doing?" And I'm like, "My dad would be drinking right along with me." So it was just a lot of sort of teasing out and coming out of denial about how alcohol was affecting me. And what I really saw where I was demonstrating the same behaviors that I saw in my family. My parents would fight. It was horrendous. And I was having the same fights in my own relationships. My father was a complete philanderer, and I was repeating the same behaviors. And I couldn't stop the behaviors and wondered why. I was having angry outbursts when I would be drunk. My behavior would change, and I would just be a screaming maniac when really, usually, I was pretty tranquil and easy going. And then I started to sneak eat. So food was really the first addiction of choice. And I was terrified I was never going to get enough. I just couldn't handle the anxiety that I was feeling. So I was trying to find soothing, and it was usually with sugar and carbs, and I had no control. I had no control. It was like the alcohol. I didn't know if it was the first drink or the eighth drink. And with food, I didn't know it was the first bite or the 27th bite, but I was looking to get out of myself. And this was causing me not to meet my goals. I was in an abusive relationship where the man held the purse strings and I was allowing that. And then ultimately, I had to face abuse in the workplace and I needed to get clean. So I reached out for help. Somebody gave me the phone number of a therapist. And back then, we didn't go to therapists. Mental health wasn't as out as it is now. You only went to therapists if you were really a sad case, at least in my family. You didn't pay someone to listen to your problems, but I was desperate. Somebody gave me a number. I called it, made an appointment, and I will never forget it. Was terrified sitting down on this man's couch in this darkened office, terrified I was going to be somehow abused. But, he asked, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Because my life is out of control and completely unmanageable." And oddly, he immediately started asking questions about how much I drank and was there alcoholism in my family. And this is quite some time ago. It was highly unusual, but he was very attuned. And he suggested I not drink while I was in treatment with him and that I go to some AA meetings. And I was like, why do I need to go to AA meetings? And he said, so you can check out and learn about your father's drinking problem, which was very savvy. And he also suggested that I go to adult children of alcoholic meetings at the time, because he said I had grown up with an alcoholic, which I didn't understand I had. I didn't know what an alcoholic really was or what that meant. I heard the word, obviously, but it just didn't infiltrate. And he said, you need to go to those adult children meetings so you learn what it was like and how growing up with addiction in your family has affected you. So off I went and I took direction. I did not drink. I went to my first AA meeting. Some man was talking about getting drunk and driving his Bentley through the department store window at Harrods. thought, well, that wasn't me. I didn't do anything like that because obviously I was comparing his circumstances to mine. But when I was really listening to his feelings, to his emotions, they were the same. I had a severe sense of you know, lack of self-worth and value. I was just brutal on judging myself and judging others. I desperately wanted to escape my own anxieties and the thought patterns going on in my mind, and I used drink to do it. So that meeting did have some kind of impact on me. And so I started to go there. And then the adult children of alcoholics meetings, that blew me away. There were like six of us around this conference table on the 12th floor of a medical building in New York City. And I'd hear the horns and the taxis below and the buses. And these people around the table were like letting out the secrets of what had happened in my family. I couldn't believe they were talking about it because one of the things that I learned growing up in a home where addiction was rife is don't talk, don't feel, and don't trust. So here these people were breaking this caveat and describing similar scenarios. I mean, like the details were quite similar, not just the feelings and emotions. And that's when I really realized, yeah, addiction has really infiltrated my being. Yes, it has had a serious effect on how I choose to live my life. And yes, I'm an addict too, and I was lucky enough, I guess, after 3 months of listening to get clean. And I've stayed clean ever since, though I don't go to those 12-step meetings any longer and haven't for a long time. But they did give me tools for living. And I did stay clean and sober through those meetings well, I've been clean and sober for decades now. I mean, it's just for me, it's a given. It's the basic piece to build the platform of stability that I need to function as a human being in this world. And even though it's been decades, and even though there's an occasion, it's very occasional, but there is an occasion where I'll think, oh yeah, I'd like to pound down that whole gallon of ice cream, or hmm, that cognac looks good. But it's rare because I can think it through, and I still remember where I was, when I needed to get clean and how much I was struggling. So I don't take a risk with it anymore. And that's the basic combat boot training I needed to address, the abuse and the trauma that I had growing up in the toxic system that I did. And it's also the base that I needed to stop living in toxicity, wake up to toxic systems that I was in. I was in an abusive relationship in my workplace. It was a toxic system. I had to leave. I was in toxic relationship, even being sober. I had to leave. So I was clinically depressed as a result of living the life experience I had. I don't know, maybe my genetics, and I had to learn how to deal with that. So I hope that's answered some of your question. It's a good one, and we all struggle. There's always an addiction of some kind, right? And mine transferred. So, um, oh, here we go with clinical depression. You had a 10-year dance with clinical depression. What helped you the most to work with it? Okay, so great question. Thanks for asking. If you're suffering right now, it's rough. Clinical depression is rough. You feel so gray and flat, and it's so unnerving. And if you're separating out of self, which I would do, it's really scary. And It's a hard place to be, but I just want to tell you there's hope. You can get through it. And I struggled with depression and suicidal ideation. I mean, I was 6 years old when I had the first real experience with suicidal ideation. And there have been different points in my life where I've had that struggle, but I'll just be specific to the clinical depression, the struggle with it. So I was probably 4.5 years clean. I was in my late 20s and I was doing okay. I was functioning. I was doing well. I was working on my own. I was pretty successful in business. I was matching celebrities to brands at the time. And I was putting together a big event. It was when two pharmaceutical companies decided to merge and they were celebrating in Austin, Texas, with this big event. And I was responsible to bring talent to the table and negotiating between two parties. I was in the middle. So I was brokering talent deals and it was highly stressful. And I was doing this on my own. Eventually I had to hire a lawyer, but it was a lot to take on. And it also replicated and echoed scenarios that I played out growing up. I think I mentioned my parents would fight violently. My father was usually drunk. And I would get in the middle of the fights and break them up. And I would also be the caretaker and try to bring the parties together, my mother and my father. And this was repeated, and it was very traumatic. I mean, my father, um, one night was my mother was screaming outside my bedroom door that I shared with my sister, pleading for her life. And I jumped out of bed and opened the door and saw my father's arms above his head with a knife and my mother screaming for her life. And I just yelled, "Stop." And they did, but I blacked out and held that trauma within my body. Another time I was walking home from school and saw my father's clothing flying out the second story window of our family home onto the front lawn. And I ran to pick up the clothes and start throwing them back in the house because I didn't want my father to leave. My mother was incredibly chaotic. She would be so loving and, give Martha Stewart a run for her money. And then she'd be beating me almost to the point of blacking out. And I wouldn't know why because her moods would change on a dime. I've come to realize I think she was struggling with schizophrenia. She was definitely struggling with mental illness. And she was also being medicated with diet pills for her food addiction. And diet pills back then were straight speeds. So here I was with an alcoholic and a speed freak. So it was pretty unbalanced circumstance. But anyway, back to the clinical depression. So here I was basically replicating the scenario. The same feelings were coming up of having to caretake these two sides and create agreements, and it was coming at my own expense. And the contracting was just a mess, and I had to get a lawyer involved. And I just started to split out of my own body. I was slate gray. I started to mumble. I could feel my inner being, but I wasn't connected. I was disassociating. And I know many of us have had this experience. And I was really fortunate. I had a very stable support system, and my friends realized what was happening. They did an intervention and sent me to a treatment center. It was actually a treatment center for alcoholism and codependence. And I had never gone to a treatment center to get sober. I was really lucky. I just got sober. So here I was, 4.5 years sober, going to my first treatment center for a 28-day program specific to codependence. And I got there. My friend took me. I don't think I could have shown up otherwise. I think I would have taken myself out. And I just wasn't in my own body. And um, I checked in and they had me on suicide watch. So I'd have to check in with the desk, and they did blood work. And the blood work results came back and they said, your serotonin levels are really low. We want to give you this medication so we can bring your serotonin levels back up so you can do the work you need to do to get out of this depression. And I said no, because I was sober and I didn't think you could take medication being sober. And they were threatening to put me away in the psych ward if I didn't take this medication. So this lovely 17-year-old angelic heroin addict who was in the same treatment program I was in ran into me the morning that I got this news. And she said, if you weren't a recovering alcoholic and addict and got this news, went to the hospital, had blood work done, and they said, here's the medication that's going to help, would you take it? And I said, well, absolutely. And she said, well, so it was non-addictive. It was antidepressants. That was the buzzword back then. I guess it still is now. And I took them begrudgingly, but it did help boost me to a point where I was actually able to focus, concentrate, and then begin to do the deep work that I needed to recover. And it was a 10-year period, I'd say, where I was working consistently with a therapist. And there were periods where I would have to see a psychiatrist because I did go on and off antidepressants for that 10-year period. But ultimately, I learned, and this is only my own experience. I am not a medical doctor. This is my experience. But I learned how to get off the elevator. I learned what the hitting bottom in the depression was. I learned how to put a support system into place and use it. So I could get support. I went to therapy. I used tools, and ultimately I got to a point where I no longer needed medication, and I used other somatic modalities. Meditation helped me a great deal and still does. I also did copious amounts of exercise, and that's another story because that became an addiction as well, to help placate this toxic backlash that I've worked with. But ultimately, I knew what to do to help my bouts of clinical depression, and I no longer need or have used medication. And I think what's helped me most is to go through that experience, honestly, like thank the experience. I'm grateful I had that experience. I'm grateful I learned what I have about how clinical depression affects me. I'm grateful that I know the warning signs. I'm happy that I'm willing to get help and accept help before I slip and slide all the way down that ladder. And it came up again towards the tail end of a divorce that I went through. That was my biggest awakening. And when I recognized I was having suicidal thoughts at that point, I immediately assigned a friend to each day of the week. So 7 friends each day. I would call the friend assigned to that day. And if I was suicidal and they weren't able to pick up the call, I would commit to call the next person on the list. And that's actually what got me through my last serious depression that I had, and the tail end of that divorce. And I did not use medication. I just used that system for support and other somatic modalities. So hope that helps. There's definitely help. Oh my gosh, I've come so much further away from depression. And I really feel our bodies are magnificent. And we do have a lot of hope and healing, natural healing ability that's sort of been trained out of our systems and negated. And pharmaceuticals aren't always necessary. In my case, I'll speak for myself. Okay, moving right along, guys. Will you describe going no contact and what that means? Okay, so those of you that know me, oh, gosh, this world brought me the perfect storm to evolve. So I was married to one that I thought was my life partner and soulmate, and he was a soulmate, but maybe not in the way that I had hoped. I call him my greatest guru, and it was my husband. And I really thought when we met, we were just made for each other. We had so much in common, and I felt safe. And I had a serious abandonment issue. And this was, decades after being clean and working through so many issues. But that abandonment issue, that codependence was ensnared so deep in the fabric of my being. And thank God this man helped me train my way out of it. He, in my opinion, is an alleged narcissist. I found my world getting smaller, my energy evaporating. I was hauling the load. I was paying for our home, our mortgage, our taxes, our insurance, our caring for our son, bringing in the groceries, just pulling way more than my fair share. And couldn't ask for help. I think I cried when he actually went to the paint store with me towards the end of the marriage. But ultimately, I was trying to bring some fiscal integrity to the relationship and decided to try to put a post-nuptial. I guess we were married by then. So, and I would never have asked for a prenuptial agreement. Oh no, I would have never made waves like that before we got married, and I would highly recommend it. But yeah, I was trying to put a post-nuptial agreement into place because I wanted to keep that marriage intact, even though I knew it wasn't healthy for me, even though I knew it was well past the expiration date. I wanted to keep that marriage together. So I convinced my then husband to go to mediation to work this out. And like most narcissists, we got to the last point and it was all a manipulation. I thought our marriage was going to be saved. But he folded his arms and his eyes went in those cold reptilian like slits. And he said, I'm hiring an attorney and I'm filing for divorce. And that loud intuitive voice that I negated so much of my life came over my right shoulder and through my heart and said, this is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. And by golly, it was like, that was probably one of the biggest challenges I have ever walked through, like fear to the core of my being. But I stood up to the challenge and um, realized that he was going to manipulate me no longer. I was going to have to be strong. I was going to have to stand up and I was going to get through this marathon and go through this divorce and leave this marriage for not only my own benefit, but that of our son. And it was a very hard, taxing, grueling experience. But when you extricate yourself from a relationship with one you feel is a narcissist, the only thing that I've experienced success with is going no contact. And if you have a child, modified contact through a third party or in writing. And no contact for me was particularly difficult in this instance because after that mediation session, we went back to our shared home, the shared home that I had bought for our family, and he wouldn't vacate. Um, he stayed in the master bedroom. And so I, by choice, took a mattress, drug it across the house into a partial conversion in our garage. And I was on a mattress on the floor in a partial conversion in our garage. And that is the billboard I needed to fall on my head to understand the dynamic of this relationship and how I was allowing myself to be treated. And I held no contact, back to your question. So, what that meant in that scenario was I did not verbally speak to my husband and I did not make eye contact with my husband. And thank God I had experience going on long-term silent meditation retreats because you don't speak and you don't make eye contact with your fellow meditators. So I had some experience in doing that. And I created a little monastery in that partial conversion in the garage for myself. And I went deep into doing somatic healing. And that's really what made the difference. But I did hold that no contact. The only engagement I had was through email response or text with my ex to be during that whole time, as well as since the divorce and his departure. And I didn't fight custody battles, even though I wanted to have my son 100% of the time. I knew that was a money pit and ultimately wouldn't help anyone. And the no contact worked. I have to say, the modified contact worked. Within 1 calendar year, we came to a settlement. I gave him a six-figure check, and off he went out of the house and onto his next source of supply. And I had to continue to hold no contact because the manipulation is so intense. The alleged narcissist knows how to push your buttons. They know your history. They know how to use it against you and will. They have no scruples when it comes to use and abuse. It's about them. And this was a gentleman who was cared for. I mean, it was all about his belly and his roof over his head. He had no consideration for others. It was a fight for me to keep our family home, but I was able to. I took that converted garage and transferred it into an income suite, and that paid for half my mortgage, my taxes, and my insurance. My son and I could stay in that home. And I continued not to engage. From time to time, he would send these long winded emails that were quite erratic. And I either would not respond or I would respond with the same 5 sentences. Please ask your son. Yes, no, you know, please ask whoever the party might be. And he had turned my aunt and uncle against me. It's one of the things narcissists will do. They will turn family members against you. And he had started early. I had seen him doing it before we were even contemplating divorce and mediation. And that aunt and uncle did turn against me, but ultimately they did let me know that what I had done, holding no contact, was what worked because their own daughter, unfortunately and sadly, had to go through a divorce that lasted many, many years with also an alleged narcissist. So, no contact does work. It's not the easier, softer way, but if you engage, you will only be brutally narcissistically abused. And the pain of that is horrendous. So, yeah, no contact works. Sad to say. Hope that helps. Okay, let's go on. I think we have a couple more questions to get through. Why have you written a book called Toxic Family? Good question. So I love my family. I have a relationship with them. I didn't want to throw them under the bus with a book titled Toxic Family. I had written a book called Magical Illumination: Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom, because I feel that's what this path has been for me. It's been a magical illumination. I've come to a point to see how my experiences really helped me evolve as a human being, to walk through some really brutal lessons and ancestral lessons and ties and clear them. And I also have great compassion because I understand my family's played an incredible role to a T. My father was forbidden from the subjects he loved, history and music. He went into science. He's an astrophysicist. Nothing he could do was good enough for his own Peter Pan of a father who really didn't want to have children. He wanted to be the child. And his mother, my grandmother, placated by assuaging my father's every need and buoying him up. And my mother's father tragically was beaten almost to the point of death by a brutal stepmother at an early age. And he forbid his own wife to show affection to their two children and perpetrated the same behavior onto my mother. He would beat her and then would expect her to stay mum. And she had her own abuse, horrendous story that she brought into this marriage and family system. So that once I worked through my own rage and anger and what seemed to be unjust and unfair, I gained a lot of compassion, just as I have for my ex-husband too. He was raised in a brutal family system, brutal, and has never addressed the core issues and is carrying all that toxicity. So back to the title of the book. It was probably a couple weeks before the book was going to be published by the publisher, who had her associate ring me and discuss the title. They wanted to call it Toxic Family: Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom. And I'm like, great, we're going to go Jerry Springer here, huh? But ultimately, I knew they were right. It is about toxic family systems. It's about surviving one. It's about how to move through it and ultimately come from a place of love to heal your own trauma and clear the system and really live in authentic freedom, because a lot of us don't even know we're in toxic family systems. A lot of us don't know we're in toxic work scenarios or involved with financial circumstances that are completely toxic. We're asleep to it, but we're waking up now. So I got a big nudge from the universe. It was time to share my story, which I didn't really understand why it would help others, but believe me, now I have. And that's why I've written the book with the title it has: Toxic Family: Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom. And it's been my biggest privilege. It's brought about healing in my own family and truth in very poignant ways. And it's also helped others who've had, an inkling and understanding, and they can relate. It's not an easy read, but it's definitely helping others with their own trajectory through their own toxic family systems. And then there are practical exercises in the appendix of the book. These are some of the tools that have helped me the most, and I share them in detail so you can use them too, if it's helpful. So this is my mission work. I had a very glittery career as a television producer. I matched celebrities with brands that led me into producing for television and to work with some very high profile household names. But ultimately, this is my purpose. I found it. Yeah, it might not be easy, but I feel like this is why I've chosen this workaround, this life, this walk, and to really see the beauty in the abuse, in the pain, and in the recovery from it. And I know that's going to sound bizarre for so many, but to really see how those challenges have ultimately served me and served my family, and how the transformation is happening, and how that toxicity, I mean, decades of ancestry falling off, and how I'm able to live now very much a new zip code, free from the abuse, free from replicating it. And when I do repeat it, I can see it pretty quickly and shift it. And I know how to self-soothe. So hope that answers that question. Um, what are some of the tools that have had the most profound effect on your recovery and living life comfortably? So happy to share. I would say meditation, and that's not emptying your mind. I remember back in the 90s when I was learning to meditate, and I thought that's what it was. It's not at all. It's Well, for me, I was trained in Vipassana style meditation, and it's just watching the thoughts, just being cognizant, watching the thoughts and noticing the sensations in the body and just tracking them. And the meditation has really helped calm my central nervous system. And the meditation has changed a lot, over the decades. I am back now to sitting on the cushion because I want to. And I don't set a timer. I sit for however long I want to sit for. Some days that's 12 minutes and some days that's 45. It just depends on how I'm feeling and what is nurturing for me. So the meditation really helps me connect with my own being and grounds me into the earth because I still have a lot of PTSD or CPTSD that comes up. My central nervous system kind of amps quite frequently, and I have to really watch it and be aware of it. And the meditation really helps with that. I think, I also incorporated into walks. I was a swimmer for a long, long time. Following that black line was great meditation. I do a lot of yoga, so meditation and then breath work, the box breathing, short breath in, hold, a longer breath out and hold, short breath in, hold, longer breath out, hold. That has been amazing. And it's scientifically proven that it's almost like a tranquilizer for your central nervous system. It calms your system down, you're able to come more from your heart. And then I'd like to credit Matt Kahn, the spiritual teacher and mentor. You'll find him on YouTube. He's amazing. He taught me to put my hand on my heart and repeat, I love you. I love you. And as a trauma and abuse survivor, it's not an easy task. Initially I thought this is nuts. But it really helps uncover the inner child, the light within my heart and connects me with my heart. And a lot of us have been trained out of that connection and been trained out of using our intuition, which, I mean, my goodness, if I would have used that intuitive voice that I heard so quickly, I wonder how much my life would be different. But I'm grateful that I'm more able and apt to tune into it now because I'm safer to do it. And just doing the I love yous has helped me garner a compassion for my own being. That's what I got out of that divorce experience. And that's one of the reasons I call my ex husband my greatest guru. I have so much respect for all I've traversed, for who I am, for how I show up, for the amount of love and light that I feel for myself and can transmit to others after experiencing all I have. So that's been a huge practical tool. So I really encourage you to use them. Yeah, they're in my book too, in the appendix, and we can have a chat or a conversation. I'm happy to share. I was just using them with a family member who was going through a very stressful job search, and he said, "Wow, those breath meditations really worked and those breathing exercises." And he's now walking, on a regular basis and looking at nature. There's nothing that connects you faster, like going into the grass, whether that's in a park or, outside your door, any kind of grass you can get your bare feet into. I did it at the car dealership when I was waiting for my car the other day. They had a big patch of nice grassy grass, and I just took my shoes off and stuck my feet right in there. And boy, it's like an immediate self-soothing mechanism to connect with Mother Nature, Gaia, and to send love and give love and receive her love. So What were some, oh, this is a good question. What were some of the positive aspects of growing up in the family you did? Yay! I never get asked that question. It's always about the trauma and drama. I mean, there was a lot of fun in our household. It was always an adventure. My father took us on crazy outings, canoeing down rapids repeatedly or climbing mountains. We'd walk over railroad bridges, we'd jump off. um, we were really given free rein to go out and explore nature, and there weren't many ties on us. I was raised to be incredibly independent. I got the message very early on there was no fallback, so I was going to have to figure it out for myself. I was also a caretaker very young. I was 5 or 6 when I was helping with the laundry, when I was vacuuming, when I was dusting, which has become a compulsion now, but but I know how to do all that stuff. I was very independent and I was a huge risk taker. As a result of what I experienced, I also didn't expect outside help, which can be a plus or a minus, but when I did experience sexual abuse in the workplace, I was training Barbara Walters at the time, who was a huge mentor for me, an icon growing up. I would watch her on my beanbag chair on my belly in my basement and wanted to be like Barbara Walters and go to New York City and be a broadcast journalist like her. Anyway, I went to New York City. I got a job at a glitzy talent agency, but I wasn't making enough money. So I started training people on the side, and Barbara became my exercise client. So one morning I rang her bell at 7 a.m. and she took one look at me and said, "Susan, get in here. What is going on with you?" And she was a great interviewer for reasons. She was highly intuitive. And within moments, she had it out that I had been sexually abused by my boss the day before in the workplace. And she said, "I'm coming with you to work today. We're going to confront this man together." And I'm like, "Yeah, no, Barbara, we can't do that. I'll do it. I'll do it." So I did confront my boss that day. He promptly fired me. I think I had 2 months of cash in the bank. And I had just extricated myself from an abusive relationship where the man was holding the purse strings, I'm embarrassed to say. And Barbara offered me a position as an assistant to her then fiance, who was running a big film distribution company. But I told her I can't be an assistant anymore, not after what I've just experienced. And I went on to form my own talent brokerage company. So there I was, I think I was 90 days sober, maybe. And I was figuring this out on my own and I had great courage. My first deal was to knock on the door of the factory because I couldn't get anybody to answer the phone. And I convinced Andy Warhol to do a commercial for Pontiac he didn't want to do. And that launched my career. I became known for matching celebrities to brands before it was chic. And that led me into producing for television. But I was willing to take huge risks because there was no fallback. There was nobody taking care of me. And so that was definitely a plus from growing up. And, my mother also instilled in me a great faith. And I do believe in a higher source. I do believe that there's a path for evolution here. And I do believe in goodness and I do believe in kindness. And I've always had a great amount of empathy. I think it's actually been tuned in that household, my empathic ability, which means that I'm able to intuit your feelings, your moods, your emotions. I mean, that's how I made that deal with Andy Warhol. I could feel his isolation. He only connected with his pugs that were running around the studio. So finally, when he looked at me after 5 minutes of me gabbing on about this commercial he should be in. He's like, "Really now? Why should I do this?" And I said, "Because the pugs can be in the shot with you." I didn't know if that was true or not, but I knew he was connected to those dogs. And he said yes. So that ability was really heightened to keep me safe in that home, which was a battlefield. And so those are some of the things that really served me growing up in that home. And I'm sure any one of us could take a short inventory and come up with quite a few things that served you. Um, but it's always important to get out and deal with the aftermath. You've got to go through the rage and the anger and the feeling of victimization and injustice first. You can't just ascend to this place of forgiveness and understanding. I knew that when I was living in that partial conversion in the garage. I mean, how unjust did that feel? Like my ex is in the master in a home I bought and paid for. He's trying to do everything he can to take this home away from me and my son. That felt pretty unjust. Um, but I had to do a lot of meditation and, practice forgiveness, even if I didn't feel it in my heart until I did, because I knew I couldn't fall prey to victim or I'd never get out. Never. And it's painful to see that in my own work now with clients when they just can't get out of the victim role or the tit for tat energy or the need to prove the injustice or the need to get an apology. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. I mean, maybe it will in the future. Believe me, I've had a little bit of justice, and a little bit of knowing, that I think my ex wishes he could have done it in a different way. I've had that experience, but ultimately I've had to let all that go and just understand I've had to step up for myself and clean up the issues, even though a lot sprouted from childhood. And the other thing that's really helped me is understand, or at least, take this in. I think I created this plan before I came in. I think I definitely had things I wanted to work out. Now, maybe not all of it was free will, and I'm definitely going to check the fine print next time I come in, but if I come in, but I definitely feel I had an agenda. And I definitely feel I've had more than several players who've played their role to a T magnificently and have served me to come to this place where I'm now grounded. I now have choices. I'm now not dependent on my partner. And it took me a long time to even get into a partnership. I think I was single and had one date by choice for 7 years. And that was after being attached at the hips in second grade. I had to have some kind of male attention. I'm out of that place. That is freedom. And that is clearing up some of the ancestral toxicity. So I'm sorry to ramble, but I think we'll fit in one more question before we come to a close with this long Q&A session. But I'm really hoping that it's helpful to some of you out there. And if you like it, we'll repeat it again. Not very often because an hour is a long time. But okay, final question. And I'm sorry, I'm not getting to everyone, but we did the best we could. After your experience, why has forgiveness come into play when it comes to family members and your former spouse? Oh, okay. Yeah. So, like I said, this is not an automatic. You really have to go through the muck and allow yourself to be angry and rage and feel the grief and the sadness and the hurt until down the road you can get to the forgiveness. And the forgiveness for me is really important because it clears the toxicity. I'm no longer holding on to it. I'm not chained to it. When I'm in a rage at someone for the actions they took towards me, I'm the one eating the rat poison ultimately. I mean, this is a process. I am not encouraging you to go from abuse straight to forgiveness. Uh-uh. But I am encouraging you to eventually open yourself to that forgiveness. And for me, the points that have been essential are understanding that I am creating soul evolution. I may have made choices. My experience may benefit others. And also, these people that have perpetrated the abuse upon me, they have their own pain. They have their own toxicity that they're living through, just like I've explained with my mother. She was horribly abused, much worse than what I've experienced. Same with my father, same with my mother's father, same with my father's mother. It goes all the way back in the lineage, but the buck is stopping with me and it can stop with you. And then I can extend this forgiveness forward. I've extended it into the workplace, into my professional life, as well as my personal life. I've had to be very careful because as an empath, I can allow myself to be used and abused. I mean, there's a U and an A in my first name, Susan, use and abuse. So I have to be careful, and we empaths, we with the light, we're going to attract the darkness. It's just gonna be. But ultimately, I have developed the tools and to be able to get to a point of authentic compassion and forgiveness. I don't have to engage. I don't have to go back if I don't want to. I don't have to eat. I can hold no contact till I go into the grave, but I don't have to hold on to the victimization, the anger, and the rage. I can have full forgiveness, and I've experienced it. And there's nothing like that freedom. So, those of you that have hung on for this entire ride, I am grateful to you. I bow to you. I hope that you've found some kind of um, resonance and some kind of soothing and some kind of support through this Q&A. It's been a privilege to share it. If you want to continue, go to susangold.us and there's ways to connect there and there's free tools. Please, if you've liked what you've heard, comment down below. Give me a thumbs up, share it with somebody else who may be helped by this conversation we've had, by these questions, and hit subscribe if that feels right. There's a free course, Signs of a Toxic Family, on the website too, that a lot have found helpful. It's identifying signs that you may have come from a toxic system or are in one now, and then tools to help soothe, and then how to move beyond it. So thanks again for joining in for another inspiration for transformation and a longer Q&A. And it is 11:11 my time, so I think that's the magical angel number to stop. And I'm so grateful to have been in your presence today. Take good care. And remember, we're in this together.